Welcome to our deep dive. We've got some really cool stuff to look at today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's all about how research findings in psychology actually make it out into the world. From just like a scientist's notes to everyone else.
Like getting published and all that.
Exactly. And we're looking specifically at Chapter 13 of Research Methods in Psychology. It's by Shaughnessy, Zechmeister, and Zechmeister.
Ah, okay. Those guys.
Yeah, so I'm excited to dig into this with you and see what we find. What's hidden in all this research stuff.
I think it'll be a fun journey. Even before an article is published, it goes through this thing called peer review.
Peer review? What is that? Like some sort of a scientific talent show where only the best of the best get through?
Haha. Yeah, something like that. It's basically like a quality control filter for all these publications.
They're like a panel of judges?
Kind of. They're experts in the field, and they carefully read through a manuscript before it's published.
Oh, so they're looking for any problems or anything?
Yeah, exactly. They're checking for sound methodology and, valid conclusions and just making sure that the study is actually contributing something new to the field.
So not every study makes the cut.
Oh, absolutely not. Think about it. Only 1 in 4 manuscripts that are submitted to these big psychology journals, they actually get published.
Wow, that's a pretty low number.
Yeah, it is. It's a pretty tough process.
So the authors must spend a ton of time crafting their arguments and really making sure that their research is top notch.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads us to another really important part of research communication.
Which is?
Writing. Clear and engaging writing. That's something the chapter really emphasizes. Even scientists have to tell a good story.
Yeah, that makes sense. If it's boring, no one's going to read it.
Exactly. Even if the findings are groundbreaking, if it's poorly written, it might just get lost in the shuffle.
So what makes good writing in this context?
The chapter really stresses being clear and concise and precise with your writing. You want your readers to be able to follow your argument really easily and understand what the implications of your research are.
Okay, so no jargon, basically.
Yeah, basically. Oh, and I've heard of this thing called the Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, vaguely. I think it's like a style guide, right?
It's basically their Bible. The APA manual sets the standard for style and format in all this psychological writing.
So everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. It ensures consistency and clarity across the entire field.
So what about the internet? Has that had an impact on all of this? It feels like everything's gone digital these days.
Oh, the internet has absolutely revolutionized how research is shared. Researchers can instantly share their findings with colleagues all over the world. They can participate in these online discussions and access these massive databases like Psychologist.
Psychonafo? What's that?
It's basically a gigantic library of psychological research literature.
So everything's in there.
Pretty much. Researchers can quickly find articles that are relevant to them using just keywords, and they can explore, specific areas that they're interested in. It's a game changer for keeping up with all the latest discoveries.
So it's kind of like Google, but just for psych research.
Yeah, exactly. It's accelerated the pace of research so much, and it's made scientific knowledge way more accessible to everyone.
That's so cool. So let's talk about the structure of a research paper now. What are the key sections and how do they kind of fit together to tell that research story?
Okay, well, it's kind of like a story with a beginning, middle, and end. A typical research report starts with something called an abstract.
Abstract.
Yeah, and that's a concise summary that kind of gives you a sneak peek at the main findings and the importance of the study.
So it's like a movie trailer to get you interested.
Exactly. Then you have the introduction.
Okay, the intro.
This sets the stage for the study. It introduces the research question and explains why it's important.
So setting the scene.
Yeah, and then the authors kind of lay out the theoretical framework.
Okay, so they're making their case for why this research matters.
Right. Then comes the method section.
The method, okay.
And this is where they explain how they did the research, what steps they took.
So it's like a recipe. Someone could recreate the study based on what's in the method section.
That's a perfect analogy. The method section includes all the details about the participants and the materials and the procedures and everything.
So other researchers could double check their work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's vital for something called replicability, which means other researchers should be able to reproduce the study and verify the findings.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the results section? Is that where all the data is?
You got it. That's where the researchers present all their findings.
Oh, cool.
They use tables and figures to show their data and often use statistical analysis to figure out if their results are significant.
So it's like taking all that raw data and turning it into something meaningful.
Exactly. And they do it in a way that's super clear and easy to understand for other researchers and anyone else who's interested in the topic.
So it's not just a bunch of numbers.
Haha. No, definitely not. Okay, so after they present their findings, what do you think comes next?
Hmm. I'm not sure. Maybe some kind of conclusion.
Actually, it's called the discussion section.
Discussion, okay.
Yeah, and this is where the researchers really get to dig into what their results mean, like the bigger picture.
So they're connecting the dots and explaining how their findings fit into the bigger picture.
Exactly. They talk about the implications of their research and they relate it back to other studies that have been done.
So it's all connected.
Yeah. And they also talk about any limitations of the study and suggest areas for future research.
Oh, so even after the study's done, they're still thinking about what else could be explored.
Research is a never-ending story. Okay, and last but not least, you have the references section.
The references.
This is where they list all the sources they used in the paper. It's basically like giving credit where credit's due.
Right, got to cite your sources.
Exactly. It acknowledges the work of all those other researchers who've contributed to the field.
It's like a team effort.
Absolutely. But what about when researchers want to share their findings beyond just writing? Like, what about presentations?
Oh yeah, presentations. I'm not a big fan of those.
Haha. Well, they are a great way to make research more engaging, you know?
I guess so. Imagine presenting your findings at a big conference.
It can be nerve-wracking, but think of it like the highlight reel of your research paper.
So just the best parts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You want to focus on the key takeaways and keep it clear and simple. Visual aids are really helpful too.
Like slides and stuff.
Yes, slides, handouts, anything that can help capture the audience's attention and make it easier to understand.
This is all about making it as interesting as possible.
Right. But you know, even before a researcher gets to publishing or presenting, they have to do something pretty important.
What's that?
They have to create a research proposal.
A proposal. What's that all about?
Think of it like a blueprint for the whole project. It's a super detailed plan that outlines their research question and how they're going to do it and what they expect to find.
So it's like a roadmap for the entire research journey.
Exactly. A good proposal is super important for getting funding and ethical approval. And it helps make sure the research is well designed and actually doable.
So it's like getting all your ducks in a row before you start.
Exactly. What do you think some of the key elements of a research proposal might be?
Well, it probably starts with like an introduction, right? To explain what the research is all about.
You got it. The introduction gives a big overview of the research problem and what we already know about it and what the research is trying to find out.
So they're explaining why their research is needed.
Right. And then comes the method section.
A method again.
Yep, this is just as important in a proposal as it is in the final report. This is where they describe exactly how they're going to do the research.
So that recipe analogy applies here too.
Absolutely. This section has to be super specific, like how they're going to choose their participants and what materials they'll use and what steps they'll follow and how they'll analyze the data.
So they're trying to think of everything that could go wrong and plan for it.
Yeah. A good proposal shows that the researchers have thought through every single detail and they're ready for anything.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the results? Do they talk about that in the proposal too?
Yes. There's a section for expected results and proposed data analysis.
Oh, so they're like predicting what they'll find.
Yeah, basically. They outline their hypotheses and talk about how they're going to analyze their data and what statistical methods they'll use.
So they're thinking ahead about how they'll interpret their findings.
Exactly. It's like looking into the future of the project and making a plan for analyzing everything.
So it's all about setting themselves up for success. Is there anything else that usually goes in a proposal?
Yeah, they also have a conclusion section that summarizes the expected outcomes and what the research might mean for the field.
So it's like wrapping everything up and highlighting the big picture.
Precisely. And of course, just like a research report, the proposal has to have references.
Right. Got to give credit where it's due.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing that scientific knowledge is built on the work of lots of different people.
It's a collaborative effort.
For sure. So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. It's been really interesting learning about all the different stages of research.
Yeah, and we've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in this world of research communication.
Well, luckily we have more time to dive in. Join us for part 2, where we'll continue uncovering all these fascinating details about psychological research.
It's going to be a fun ride. Welcome back. It's kind of wild to think about all these different ways research gets shared.
It is. It's like journals and presentations and even those big online databases we've been talking about.
Exactly. It makes you realize how much work goes into just getting those findings out there.
Totally. But something I've been wondering is like, How does all of this relate to someone like me?
What do you mean?
Well, I'm not a scientist,
Yeah.
and I don't plan on publishing any research papers anytime soon. So why does all this research communication stuff even matter to me?
That's a really good question. But think about it. We're constantly being bombarded with information these days.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like news articles, social media posts, even just conversations with people. Everyone's always making claims and stating facts.
It can be overwhelming.
It really can. And that's where understanding research communication comes in handy.
How so?
Well, it gives you the tools to actually critically evaluate all that information.
Oh, I see. So you can tell what's legit and what's not.
Exactly. When you understand how research is conducted and reviewed and published, you can start asking the right questions.
Like what kinds of questions?
Like, was this study published in a reputable journal? Did it go through peer review? What are the limitations of the study? Things like that.
So it's like having a BS detector for information.
Uh-huh. Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
It helps you cut through all the noise and figure out what you can actually trust.
That's super helpful. I never thought about it that way before.
And it's not just about being a good consumer of information.
What else is it about?
It's also about understanding how scientific discoveries are made. Getting a glimpse into that whole process.
So you can appreciate all the work that goes into it.
Yeah, you start to see all the challenges and the rigor and how scientific knowledge is constantly evolving.
It's like pulling back the curtain, seeing how the magic happens.
Exactly. You realize that science isn't about finding these absolute truths. It's about asking questions, testing things out, refining our understanding, and sometimes even overturning what we thought we knew.
It's a lot more dynamic than I think people realize.
It definitely is. It's a constant process of discovery and exploration.
That's really cool. And something else I've been thinking about.
Yeah, what's that?
Well, we've talked about all these ways of sharing research,
Mm-hmm.
like through journals and presentations and stuff. But how does research actually make a difference in the real world?
Oh, that's a great question. The impact of research can be pretty direct sometimes.
Like how?
Think about new medications or therapies. They're often developed based on clinical trials and research findings.
So the research directly leads to better healthcare.
Exactly. But sometimes the impact is a bit more subtle. It gradually shapes our understanding of things like human behavior and mental processes.
I see.
And that knowledge can then be used to improve education programs and social programs and even just our personal relationships.
So it's like a ripple effect.
Yeah, exactly. It starts with the research, and then those findings spread out and influence so many different areas of our lives.
That's pretty amazing. It makes you realize how interconnected everything is.
It really does. And sometimes, the impact of research can take a while to become clear.
What do you mean?
Well, one single study might not completely change everything overnight.
Right?
But as more and more research is done and those findings start to point in the same direction, that's when you start to see those big shifts in how we think about things.
So it's a long game.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
But it's a game that's worth playing because the impact can be huge.
Totally. Okay, so before we wrap up this part, I have a question for you. We've talked about research papers as stories, right?
We have, yeah.
And we've talked about how research can have all this impact on the world. So I'm curious, can you think of a research story that's really stuck with you? Like one that changed your perspective on something or made you question what you thought you knew?
That's a good one. Let me think about that for a second.
It's a tough one. There's just so much research out there.
I know, right? It's easy to kind of take it for granted, but when you really stop and think about the impact it has on our lives, it's pretty mind-blowing.
I agree. Okay, well, maybe we can come back to this question in the next part.
Yeah, let's do that. I want to give it some more thought.
Welcome back. I feel like we've been on this amazing journey, exploring all these different aspects of research.
Me too. It's been really fun.
And speaking of journeys, I've been thinking about that question you asked last time.
Oh, yeah, about a research story that's really stuck with me.
Exactly. Have you had a chance to think about it?
I have, yeah. It's tough to choose just one. There's so much fascinating research out there.
I know, right? It was hard for me to pick just one, too. But there's this one study that's always kind of blown my mind. It's called the marshmallow test.
The marshmallow test. Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it was done back in the 60s at Stanford. And basically, they gave all these kids a choice.
Okay, what was the choice?
They could have one marshmallow right away, or they could wait and get 2 marshmallows later.
Oh, that's a tough one. Especially for a kid.
Right, it's all about delayed gratification. And what's crazy is that the researchers found that the kids who could resist that temptation, they actually ended up having, better outcomes later in life.
Really? Like, in what
like
ways?
academically and socially, and even in terms of their health. It's wild.
That is pretty amazing. So it's like being able to wait for those 2 marshmallows was a sign of something bigger.
Yeah, it seems like it. And what's really interesting is that the researchers actually observed all these different strategies that the kids used to distract themselves from the marshmallow.
Oh, like what?
Like some of them covered their eyes and others sang songs or like made up stories.
Ah, that's so cute.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It makes the whole thing so much more relatable. And for me, what was really powerful was this idea that these like simple strategies for delaying gratification could actually have such a huge impact on a person's life.
Yeah, it makes you think about the power of self-control.
Totally. It challenges this idea that you're just born with talent or intelligence, and that's what determines your success.
Right, like anyone can learn these skills.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, like, how can we teach these skills to kids? How can we help them develop that self-control?
It's definitely a big question. And, the research has also had a big impact on things like education and parenting.
Absolutely. It's like sparked all these conversations about how to raise kids who are able to make good decisions and resist those temptations.
It's all about creating those supportive environments where kids can thrive.
And what's really cool is that this is just one example of how research can actually make a real difference in our lives.
It's not just about those abstract theories or ideas. It's about understanding ourselves and the world around us better.
Exactly. And using that knowledge to make things better.
And that's something I hope our listeners take away from this whole deep dive. Research isn't just for scientists, it's for everyone.
It's about staying curious and asking questions and always being open to new ideas.
And it's about realizing that we're all part of this ongoing journey of discovery.
Perfectly said. So to our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never lose that sense of wonder.
Because you never know what amazing insights are waiting to be uncovered.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of psychological research.
It's been a pleasure exploring all this with you.
And to all our listeners out there, keep those research stories coming. We love hearing from you.